Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we have a This Year in Perfume, and it's going to be from the year 1991. Now, sorry about the hat, but it actually is haircut day, and you don't want to see my hair not actually styled. So, hat it is. And 1991 is an interesting year because it's sort of known for a couple things in most people's memory. Number one is the Gulf War. And so that is officially when Operation Desert Shield went into place. Well, it began, I think, in 1990 when Iraq invaded Kuwait, and then the U.S. and NATO troops basically placed troops in Saudi Arabia, and off began Operation Desert Shield, which, as George Carlin says, is the only war that was carried on all the news channels and cable, or the first war, I should say. The very first war that was on all the news channels and cable. And so apparently the war got pretty good ratings as far as people watching the news, watching our F-117 Nighthawks bombing the Iraqi countryside, watching them shoot at stuff they couldn't see, and Norman Schwarzkopf and his tank maneuvers in the desert. Anyways, so that's probably the number one thing people think about. And then there's a handful of other things, but I just picked out a couple. So number one was Jeffrey Dahmer. So if you've watched, the Dahmer Netflix series, or you're into that kind of thing, apparently Jeffrey Dahmer was arrested on July 22nd of 1991 after they found multiple people's remains in his Milwaukee apartment. And if you're into that sort of thing, or you're into studying serial killers and stuff like that, he's like one of the bigger names that most people knew, mostly because of some of the crazy things he ended up doing. But that is one major event. And then a couple examples of some toys that really got me thinking being a little kid, because I was only 6 years old. Super Nintendo came out. So every kid who's in their 30s like me probably remembers the Super Nintendo and the Mario game and the controller and Street Fighter and all that stuff. But Super Nintendo Entertainment System apparently dropped. It was $199.95 retail in 1991. And apparently there was a Czechoslovakian Barbie that was also a very famous toy. Mattel created the Barbie, the Czechoslovakian Barbie in 1991. And that retailed for $18, which seems like a lot of money for a Barbie. But anyways, just some interesting things that I noticed. Also, some interesting cost of living, just to sort of, just to make you feel a little bit nostalgic. The average cost of a new house, 120 grand. The average annual income per year in America, 29,000. The average monthly rent, $495. A gallon of gas, $1.12. Pound of bacon, $1.95. Dozen eggs, 85 cents. Ah, the good old days. So, okay. So let's get into the perfumes, because I know that's why you're all here. And let's do scent of the day, because I actually did go to work before the haircut. And so I didn't go wearing the hat, obviously, but I did go dressed up. So I figured, what the hell, I'm going to stay dressed up. And I wore a fragrance that fits this style. This is a perfect office fragrance for me. And it's the middle of summer, I know, I don't care. Sometimes I just get an inkling for something like this. Someone mentioned this fragrance. Someone commented on maybe my video from 1988 or something like that happened, where they commented on an old video, and they mentioned this fragrance, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to wear it. And it is Fahrenheit. Now, this bottle right here that I'm wearing is actually an 80s mini that came directly from Manouche. Some of you folks who are really good at telling how old a bottle is will be able to tell by the address. The batch code is right there if you're really, really interested. But I think we sourced this back to a late 80s bottle. So this is like an 88 or 89 bottle. So very early on, first version. And I'll tell you what, while it is absolutely fantastic, it's everything people say it is. It's one of the greatest designers of all time. This bottle that I have from probably within the last decade or so, I think this is a 2013 or 14 bottle. I have to check. Either way, it is fantastic. So don't worry about buying the new stuff, or don't go pay huge money for the vintage. One of these days, I'll do a comparison between the deep vintage and a newer bottle, but that day will be in the future. But just high-level overview, I can tell you that the old bottles are fantastic. The new bottles are fantastic, too. Fahrenheit's one of those fragrances that sort of it evolved with the times, if you will, because they ended up discovering new molecules that allowed Fahrenheit to continue to smell so close to what it is and to what it was back in the day. In fact, at least in my bottle, I don't, at least in my mini from the late 80s, I don't get the big gasoline-like opening that I do from this one. This one actually feels maybe even a little bit more gasoline vibe in the opening. But I do get unbelievable florals and this leathery dry down. And so it has this interesting depth that you could compare and contrast and maybe pick out slight differences here and there. One thing people don't give Fahrenheit enough credit for, everyone knows it for that big gasoline opening with the violet leaf, amazing violet leaf opening. But one thing that a lot of people overlook is the fact that there are fantastic florals in this fragrance. It's a big, actually, floral heart in Fahrenheit that makes it what it is. And when you really think about that, it makes sense because the late 80s were known for fragrances that had big floral hearts for men. Think about stuff like this, Tenere by Paco Rabanne, which I absolutely love and adore. Huge floral masculine fragrance. Think of Iquitos. That was originally supposed to be a women's fragrance. It almost won the brief for Dior's Poison. And Alain Delon ended up picking it up and turning it into Iquitos, late 80s fragrance, big florals, targeted towards men. So it actually makes sense when you think of it in that context that Fahrenheit would have a lot of florals, but a lot of people overlook it. They notice the gasoline, and sometimes they'll comment on the leather, that this is a spicy, leathery fragrance, and the leather note in the vintage is stunning. There is no doubt about that. The way it dries, oh, it's so good. But don't buy the vintage thinking you're going to get something so massively different from what's being put out. This is one fragrance that has actually really withstood the test of time, and I'm very glad to have this 200 mil. So once my little 10 mil mini of the true OG vintage is gone, I won't be going back and buying like an old bottle. I'm just going to wear this. I also do have a mid-90s bottle. I've got 50 mils of a mid-90s thanks to my old man who gifted me a bottle. And so I'm pretty well stocked on Fahrenheit, but that was my scent of the day, and I absolutely adore it. That's in any time, any season type fragrance for me. No problem wearing this in the Texas heat in June. Okay, so let's get started. This is actually going to be a top 17, and I think we're going to spray some of these because, well, it's been a while, and whenever we do these videos and the list is relatively small, I feel like I can spray them and get away with it. So let's start with a Joe Malone fragrance. Of course, Joe Malone ends up on the bottom of the list. It's really for people that, it's almost like a fragrance house for people that don't like fragrance. I don't know many frag heads who like a Joe Malone fragrance. You know what I mean? It's kind of, it's perfume for people that don't want to wear perfume or work in like a office environment where they're not allowed to wear fragrance, let's say, like a hospital or something like that. But this is, the one from 1991, is a fragrance from Joe Malone called Lime, Basil, and Mandarin. Lime, Basil, and Mandarin. So one of these days when I get bored, I will review this. But in a nutshell, it's basically, you guessed it, lime, mandarin, and basil, with a little bit of this patchouli, vetiver, amberwood. Yes, believe it or not, there is an amberwood note in a Joe Malone fragrance from the fresh 90s. Go figure. But it still wears like you would expect a Joe Malone to wear. It's extremely fresh and citrusy and uplifting, and my guess is it's probably going to last 3 or 4 hours, and that's it. But not my favorite style of perfumery, but not the worst thing I've smelled either. Estee Lauder owns Joe Malone now, and believe it or not, they are actually one of the more popular niche brands. You don't hear people like me raving emphatically about Joe Malone fragrances on YouTube, but as far as sales go, believe it or not, people buy them. They go to the mall, they buy them because it's a simple wear. It's not something that's hard. You know, Fahrenheit is much more challenging to wear than something like this for the average person. I really don't like how the citruses are done in a lot of Jo Malones, but I would rather wear my Creeds. Let's put it that way. Okay, so that was number 17. Number 16 is a Kenzo. And it's actually a discontinued Kenzo, if you believe Parfumo. And so this is Kenzo Pour Homme. And it kind of comes in this like bamboo-looking bottle. And it's got the old school built-in sprayer. But Kenzo Pour Homme is a very strange fragrance because it's considered a fresh aquatic fragrance, if you will. But there's some notes in here that have a slight barbershop tint. So it has this strange ozonic feeling. So don't think so much about... Don't think so much about... don't think so much about true salty marine-like aquatic like you would in Aqua di Gio that came in the mid-90s. Everything changed with Aqua di Gio and CK1. This is a fresh aquatic fragrance that when I think about this fragrance, I think about a man who, let's say, applies a little bit of a barbershop fragrance, and then on top of that barbershop fragrance, he puts sunscreen. And then, as the fragrance continues to dry, there is a slight woodiness to it. There's a juniper note in here, which highlights some of the greener, fresher aspects of juniper. And imagine then that man who sprayed on this barbershop-like fragrance, let's say, maybe some mosses and some woods and stuff like that, and musk. It is musky, I will say that. It is musky. Goes out onto, let's say, a boat. He doesn't actually get in the water, but you know, he can sort of smell what the water smells like around him. And more importantly, he can smell the air. Of course, he's smelling the air, but the air gives off this almost slightly ozonic touch, okay? And that ozonic touch is mixed with this fruitiness. So it's actually a pretty playful, summery. I mean, this would make a great beach fragrance because of that weird kind of sunscreen vibe that I get. But it still carries these traditionally masculine traits, you know, so it has things like the juniper, the clary sage, which is a historically very masculine note. Clary sage has this dry, sweaty-like quality to it with oak moss in the base, and sandalwood and cedarwood and musk and ambergris, and they claim there was ambergris in here. Christian Mathieu was the perfumer of this in 1991, and Parfumo says it was last marketed by LVMH, so even the new bottles are gone, if that's true. I don't know how old my bottle is. I know the really old ones have like a design on them, almost like details of, you know, this bamboo stick you're holding or something. I don't know what the bottle's actually supposed to be. But it is old enough where it actually does not say, and you can see someone scratched out the batch code when they sold it to me. But it's old enough where it says Kenzo, if it would focus. You can see right there on the bottom it says Kenzo Parfums. So it doesn't actually say LVMH, but this is a good fragrance. It's just this style, you know, it's hard for me. Even in the summer, you see what I'm wearing. I'm wearing Fahrenheit. I'm not wearing stuff like that, which if I was very season specific, that's the type of stuff I would wear. But I do need to give this a wear, and I need to review this kind of stuff too on the channel. So that is Kenzo Pour Homme from 1991 at number 16. Number 15 is a fragrance that I bought from Anouge, and Anouge at Enchanté, and I never really got along with this from the start. It's a Lancetti fragrance, and it's called Il de Lancetti. Il de Lancetti, I-L, Il de Lancetti. And this is, to me, totally overshadowed by its older brother, Lancetti Uomo. Lancetti Uomo, this one right here. If you have my taste, and if you ever see this bottle, this is what it looks like. The box almost has this like, you know, green, off green look to it. But if you ever see this one, Lancetti Uomo, grab it. It is absolutely worth it. This is old school 80s leather, castoreum, green, just I mean, it's competing with things like Antaeus and Bellamy, and it's hands down the best thing Lancetti's ever done, hands down. So whenever I smelled Il de Lancetti, I was like, you know, like it just kind of disappointed me, and so I never properly gave it the wear and the attention that I would say it probably deserves. But I'm circling back to it, and I'm starting to try to wear it a little bit more. There's spicy touches in here. So when I first wore this, like the very first time, I picked up a lot of musk. Okay, so there was a lot of musk in here, and I thought the musk was improperly balanced, let's say. This got discontinued a long time ago because the last group that actually marketed this was Schiaparelli Pecans, or Schiaparelli Benessare Pecans, and they've been long gone for a long time, if I understand correctly. But one thing that you will notice, the more that I've worn Il de Lancetti from 1991, something keeps coming back to me. And you know what it is? There's something that keeps coming back to me, and it actually should not surprise you, because in 1990, this was a huge hit for Chanel. And that is Egoiste. So the more I've sort of worn Il de Lancetti, the more I have come to the conclusion that this was inspired by Egoiste, because it has this leathery, woody dry down. Now, there's no sandalwood listed in Il de Lancetti, but there is a cedarwood note. And let's just say, in general, the woodiness gives off this vibe of Egoiste, okay? Imagine like a muskier version of Egoiste. That's what it smells like to me. It smells like an Egoiste that has traditional vintage masculine notes in it. Like, for example, Artemisia, anise, basil. And the more I've revisited it, the more that I've said to myself, this is not a bad fragrance. Now, it's nowhere near Lancetti Uomo. Lancetti Uomo is backup bottle worthy, and I do have a backup bottle of this because I love this stuff so much. But Il de Lancetti is not one to overlook if you like stuff like this. Now, obviously, I'm going to say what everyone's probably thinking. Egoiste is the superior fragrance, hands down. So, you know, if you've got Egoiste and you love it, then you probably don't need Il de Lancetti. Plus, it's discontinued and it's hard to find. But if you're someone like me and you're a collector, I would say, if you were to talk to me about this a year ago, I'd probably say pass. Don't even bother with it. But I've been sort of playing with it a little bit here and there. And wearing it to bed occasionally when I'm not testing some sample or something. And it's grown on me more. So I recant that stance of just pass on Il de Lancetti, and I would say if you can get it for a decent deal, go for it. But if you already have, you know, Chanel's Egoiste, you probably don't need to run out and buy a bottle. But it's not as bad as I thought it was at first. Let's put it that way. So that is Il de Lancetti at number 15. Number 14 is a strange fragrance. This is actually a weird this year in perfume. Because there's a lot of fragrances that just, I'm not really 100% sure where they go in my mind. You know what I mean? Like, usually there are some years where I'm like, oh, this is a no-brainer, and I just knock the list out. This one, I kind of did it, and I looked at it, and I really, even now, looking at the list, I'm just like, I don't really know how, you know, obviously these are all opinions, but I don't have this hard, firm set, like, yes, this goes here, and then after this, Jacomo Anthracite comes up, and, you know, that kind of thing, where you just know. This one, I'm kind of, all of these, I'm just like, it's just a weird year, 1991. But this is Balestra Pour Homme, and what's weird about this is this fragrance is basically a re-engineering of the fragrance by Weruska and Joel, okay? And Weruska and Joel usually do very good reformulations, and I found them to do very good reformulations. I really like the reformulation that they did for Alain Delon Classic. So Alain Delon originally came out in 1980. They redid it and called it Alain Delon Classic, and I love the remake that they've done. This one, it's almost like a different fragrance. So this version from 1991 is completely different from the original one from 1979, is what I hear. So the OG from 1979 is still on my wish list, even though this is discontinued, even though this is a good fragrance. I want to buy the original from 1979 because I hear from people that I trust that Balestra Pour Homme from 1979 is nothing like the Balestra Pour Homme that got released in 1991. And basically, what they did that's different is that they tried to make the fragrance updated with the times, okay? So they took a fragrance from the late 70s that was a big animalic sort of challenging fragrance style. And what they did is they, let me try to put this damn cap back on. How do you go? Go back into your home. Here we go. So what they did is they tried to update it for, where are you going? You're going back over here. They tried to update it for the early 90s. So this is like a spicy, citrusy, and almost like there's slight hints of aquatic. Like, I'll give you an example. This feels like sort of an updated version of something like this. So think in this territory, okay? Now, New West is a fantastic take on an aquatic. Actually, this is how I prefer my aquatics done, to be honest with you. I prefer them done sort of in the old school style. And I know the mid-90s is now, in 2023, old school. But even older school than when Aqua de Jo and all that stuff came out. You know, because that kind of took it into a pure, like, marine, salty marine thing. I like the aquatics when there were woods and when there were green, like, you know, the Artemisia touches, the herbal basil in there, and the pine, and, you know, and there was still like a woody, sandalwoody, cedary base. I like that creamy sandalwood. I like the oak moss. I like that style. So if you just put a little bit of aquatic notes in there and made it a little bit fresher, kind of like New West was starting to do the trend, right, towards the aquatic. Not the cool water style, which I need to smell a vintage bottle of cool water one day. But Balestra Pour Homme sort of does that. It plays on that theme. And I know that the one that came out in 1979 doesn't smell like this. Now, this is more, I would say, spicy and woody. And there's no notes in Parfumo. Let me check base notes just for kicks, but I'm curious out there if anyone is familiar with the OG, or if anyone has like a bottle for sale or something. I would be interested in the original Balestra. Let's see if I can pull it up. Balestra. Renato Balestra. All right, let's take a look. Definitely could be worse, I'll tell you that. Balestra Pour Homme. See, and what's interesting is, if you go to, so I always go off of Parfumo. That's what I've said many a times. But if you go to base notes, they actually have this bottle, the one that I'm showing, as a 1982 release of Weruska and Joel. And that's something else I wanted to cover, because I remember they had that with you guys. And so if that's true, like, let's just play a hypothetical game and say base notes is correct. And this is a 1982 release, that the original came out in 1979, and then in 1982, Weruska and Joel decided to make this. If that is actually true, they are one of the earliest adopters of this marine style with the old school masculine notes, the vetiver, the oak moss, the musk, the, you know, there's gaiac wood in here, which is sort of a slightly smoky wood note, and this aromatic freshness, you know, aromatic fresh notes. I would imagine maybe some Basil, Artemisia, something like that, with those marine notes. So if this actually came out in 1982, they were far, far ahead of the curve. If I had to guess, I would guess Parfumo's right. And this version actually came out in 1991. If it came out in 1991, it would be in line with the arc, the trajectory of, you know, New West coming out in the late 80s, and then Cool Water in the late 80s, and then sort of the floodgates opened up to this aquatic, you know, marine style. But it's mixed with many old school masculine notes. So it's a good fragrance. It's just, again, it's kind of strange. I don't really know where to put it. So that's Balestra Pour Homme. But if anyone has any more information on that, please let me know if they know which one is correct, whether it's Parfumo or base notes, or if there's any information about the true OG. Okay, next on the list is a Giacomo fragrance, and probably my second favorite Giacomo fragrance behind Giacomo di Giacomo, the best Giacomo fragrance. But this is Giacomo's Anthracite Pour L'Homme. So Tom Ford, of course, put out an anthracite, noir anthracite fragrance. But this is actually a splash. So what I do with my splashes is I decant them, and I decant them into stuff like this. So I just have them in my decants, and then whenever I want to spray, I can just go ahead and spray, because I prefer to spray. So let me label the blotter. Now, this fragrance is just, it's a really good fragrance. It follows in the footsteps of fragrances like Givenchy Xerius, right? Like a proper classic fougere style, but modern, in a modern amber fougere style. And you would think that if you know my taste, you know that I love amber fougeres. And so you would think this would be 100% right up my alley. I mean, that this would be a pure love. However, I will tell you that there's something about this that just seems a little bit underwhelming. So there's bergamot, grapefruit, and I'm getting the grapefruit majorly right now. And it does smell like a well-done grapefruit note. I feel like modern grapefruit is done in a synthetic smell that is starting to get associated with cheap designers. But the old school way of doing grapefruit almost feels like you're literally just peeling the damn grapefruit. It's a beautiful opening. But they've mixed it with strange notes. So there's a sweet corn note in here, okay, which is weird. There is lavender and iris and cyclamen and carnation and jasmine. And so even though it has these posh notes, I love the iris, and it has that ambery tonka bean. You know, I love the combination of sort of that barbershop feel with the lavender and that amber sort of tonka, you know, base with the oak moss and the cedar. I love amber fougères. It's one of my favorite. It's definitely my favorite fougère category, if you will. But there's just something about this that just seems a little underwhelming. Every time I wear it, I'm always left wanting a little bit more. And I think what ended up happening is they wanted to create a fragrance that was a amber fougère, right? And I think they had this idea in their mind. And my guess is that they started to realize the market sort of shifting away from them and going towards something else. And so they tried to add this weird sort of freshness in here that doesn't belong. It feels like if they would have stuck to their guns, they would have created one of the greatest amber fougères, the spicy, woody amber fougères of all time. But I feel like they tried to bow down to the whims of the market, and they just sort of created something that always just leaves me wanting more, if that makes sense. If you've ever had fragrances like that, you probably know what I'm talking about. But Anthracite Pour L'Homme, good fragrance, but don't go pay huge money for it. There are better amber fougères, but it is good. I'm glad to have it, especially as a collector of discontinued fragrances. I like Anthracite Pour L'Homme. Okay, next on the list we have a Giorgio Beverly Hills fragrance, and this is actually a vintage mini from Manouche, I think, and this is called Red. So I've got a bigger full bottle from EA. Let's see if it's here. It is. Elizabeth Arden made the newer bottle, and you can actually see what they did. They darkened the hell out of the juice. This is the vintage when it was just Giorgio Beverly Hills. Yeah. So you can just see Giorgio Beverly Hills right there. No Elizabeth Arden. And then the new one is actually EA. Right there, copyright EA Fragrances, Elizabeth Arden. And this is a fragrance that suffered from reformulation. I'll tell you that, 100%. I'm going to do a comparison video between the two one day. The vintage is far, far superior. And for the people out there who did videos bashing this, I can tell you they're smelling the new one. They're smelling the EA version, most likely. Because this is supposed to be like a spicy, woody fragrance in the vein, okay, of things like Patu Pour Homme and stuff like that. But imagine Patu Pour Homme with more notes, because Patu Pour Homme is actually a pretty simplistic composition. It is just focusing on very high quality ingredients, right? And of course, people love that Mysore sandalwood that Jean Carlio used to make in Patu Pour Homme. So this was almost touted as like a Patu Pour Homme, substitute if you didn't want to pay big money. And I could see where people are coming from, but you have to go for the vintage. And the vintage does a proper job of doing this almost leather chypre style creation. That's actually really good. It's spicy, woody, leathery. The notes come across as smelling high quality in the vintage. But if you go for the EA version, it does smell cheap. It definitely smells like they lost a step. I still don't think it's a bad fragrance. I still like the new version. But, if you want the proper feel of what the scent is, you have to go for the vintage. So one of these days, I'll review it. But that's Red for Men by Giorgio Beverly Hills at number 12. Number 11 is a Lacoste fragrance, and it is Lacoste Land. So look at the presentation back in the day. Look at this pouch. I mean, can you imagine some penny-pinching firm that owns a brand like Lacoste, allowing them to do a leather pouch, a real proper, look at the quality leather pouch that this goes into. This thing will outlast me. This leather pouch will be around a lot longer than I am. It feels like it'll last forever. And the bottle is fantastic. I think I'm going to use it in the thumbnail. So Lacoste Land is a very interesting fragrance because Lacoste Land is one of those fragrances that I think got discontinued instantly. It was like a one-run fragrance. Sofapar is the distributor. If for those of you interested, Sofapar is the distributor. And it's sort of like this spicy, woody green fragrance that Parfumo compares it to the original Burberry's for Men, which I probably wouldn't have made that comparison. To me, you know what it smells like to me? It smells like a sport flanker of something like Eau de Hermes. Imagine like a spicy, but focuses a little bit more on the green touches, and there's some neroli, so it adds a little bit of, neroli adds this almost like laundered freshness. And so imagine Lacoste Land. So imagine this spicy, earthy sport flanker of something like Eau de Hermes. It's actually a really interesting combination, if you ask me. Yeah, there's lavender. So it is it has a little bit of this grounded old school. And you get the lavender, but it's mixed with all of these citruses and that neroli freshness and, strangely enough, sort of the earthiness of galbanum. So on one hand, that's why I say it's almost like one foot in the past with something like Eau de Hermes with that old school spiciness. But it doesn't have the thing about Land that is, it doesn't have that Eau de Hermes has, is Eau de Hermes has this almost like cinnamony, red hot, feel. Even though it is animalic, there's this big, there's this big cinnamon, red hot feel to Eau de Hermes. And here it doesn't have that. Instead, it just focuses on sort of the earthier qualities. So you get lavage, you get juniper berry, you get oak moss absolute, you get coumarin, you get sage, and you get and it is like an ambery benzoin sort of dry down too. But it's spicy, it's green, it's earthy, but you know, because of that weird sort of freshness, it would be one of the weirdest sport fragrances of all time. But everything about the fragrance, like if you look at the marketing advertisement, you look at the pouch, you know, it's all about like, hey, we're gonna put this in our backpack and we're gonna go hiking and we're gonna apply. That was the idea behind the marketing of Land. If you're interested, go look at some of the marketing from the brand. And I think mine is a metal flask because it's a splash. I think the spray had like this plastic bottle too. So that makes it even more, you know, easy to bring with you on the fly. But yeah, the nutmeg. And oh, the other thing that really comes out here, there's a brilliant bourbon vetiver note. So if you want to smell high quality vintage vetiver, this dries down to an amazing sage, nutmeg, vetiver, coumarin. Beautiful. Yeah, fantastic. I have a hard time figuring out when I want to wear. That's the problem with a lot of these is even though I think they're good fragrances, all of them, I don't think any of them I've mentioned so far are bad fragrances. I just very rarely do I want to wear Il de Lancetti or Kenzo Pour Homme or yeah, that's why I say 1991 is sort of a weird year. But that is Lacoste Land at number 11. Number 10. Number 10 is, I think, a very iconic fragrance. It's Carolina Herrera for Men. This is a vintage bottle I got from Anuj. This is a splash. So again, I decanted it. Where are you, Carolina Herrera? I might not have grabbed you. Okay, we won't spray this one. But Carolina Herrera for Men, interestingly enough, I think that this ended up being a precursor to this. This ended up being a precursor to Dolce & Gabbana Pour Homme, the 1994 version with the shitty sticker I had to tape on because it keeps falling off. The made in Italy, the Euro Italia one, okay? Yeah, I think this was a precursor for me to this. You know, if you like that fresh tobacco feel of Dolce & Gabbana Pour Homme from 1994, check out Herrera for Men. I think Puig is still marketing this. I don't know what the new ones look like because this is a short ingredient list vintage, okay? And it's rosemary, citrus leaf, lavender, neroli, clove, pepper leaf, geranium, sandalwood, amber, and tobacco. But that's sandalwoody, you know, rich tobacco contrasted against sort of, again, the freshness of neroli, the citrusy, the citrus leaves, and then the classic lavender, which you also get in Dolce & Gabbana. Sort of you'll definitely see similarities between these two. This is the superior fragrance for me. But if you're into sort of like going back and doing the archaeology, going back, you know, ancestry.com and see which fragrance turned into this one and how everything connects together, you should definitely give Carolina Herrera for Men a spin. This is a good perfume. Okay, so that is Carolina Herrera for Men at number 10. Number 9. Number 9 is also a really good fragrance, but it's a take on a classic to me. And this is Valentino's Vendetta Pour Homme. And beautiful bottle, actually. And I have to give a special shout out to, I believe it was Justin Height, I believe, sent me this bottle, if I'm not mistaken. And so Vendetta Pour Homme is sort of this spicy, woody fragrance that was done by Edward Fleischier, master perfumer. The issue that this fragrance had, well, it's not an issue, but it ends up smelling like Halston Z14. So if you know Halston Z14, you'll get sort of this updated, spicy version of it, but they've added bay rum. So it's a little bit of this, you know, slightly boozy, but bay rum also recalls back to like these old aftershaves. So it's spicy, it's woody, it's leathery. It's I think it's a really good creation. It's just not super unique. If you know Halston Z14 or even Tom Ford's Italian Cypress, this is one of the reasons I never paid big bucks for Italian Cypress, because I have this and I have Z14. I'm so happy with both. So there's really no reason for me to... I'd love to smell Italian Cypress one day, but I wouldn't pay big money for it, and that's why. And it's got that oak mossy, labdanum, you know, there's a little bit of richness there. But again, lavender and neroli, another lavender neroli combination. That's actually 3 in a row. Lacoste Land, Herrera for Men, and Vendetta Pour Homme all have that lavender neroli combination. So there's that old school classic lavender masculine feel, and then there's also that freshness of neroli. And you noticed in 1991, it hadn't gone full aquatic yet, so it was starting to turn fresher. And I think one of the ways the perfumers added some of that freshness, almost that fresh laundered feel, is with the neroli. And you saw it in 3 fragrances in a row right there. Okay, next on the list we have number 8. And number 8 is a almost like a holy grail fragrance for some people. And for me, it's a good perfume. It's one that I enjoy, but it's definitely not a holy grail. It's Polo's Crest. And Polo's Crest is sort of Polo's attempt to take Polo Green from 1978 and modernize it for the 90s. And so for someone like me who likes the old school stuff, Polo Green is Polo's best fragrance, hands down, bar none. It's one of the best green leather fragrances ever created. The pine note in that is stunning. The tobacco note, oh, I mean, to me, Polo Green is what a man should smell like, especially if you can find those old Warner or Cosmere bottles. But sales were starting to sort of, I think, lag in the early 90s. And Polo saw an opportunity to maybe update their iconic Polo Green fragrance. And so what they put out is Polo Crest. And Polo Crest sort of takes that Polo Green DNA and it removes some of the heavier aspects. So it takes out the tobacco, okay? And it adds a little bit more, it's still a spicy green, leathery chypre, you know, it still has that woody earthiness that you would expect. It still has the pine, but it just doesn't feel as, you know, it doesn't feel as heavy as the, it's not, honestly, it's not as good of a fragrance. I don't think it's as good of a fragrance as Polo Green. Like if you had vintage Polo Green, you don't need Polo Crest. The collector in me wanted it, and luckily Anuj found me a tester with a couple, you know, 20% left or so. And so I've gotten to wear it a couple times, and one of these days I'll do a full review, but do not go pay big money for that is my recommendation. Okay, next on the list we've got number 7, and number 7 is the only fragrance from this house worth hunting down, okay, in my opinion. You can skip everything else. It's from the house of Otto Kern, and this is called Cycle. Now, Cycle is a very interesting fragrance because it actually uses this unbelievably bitter. It is extremely bitter. And it's, yeah, it uses this blackcurrant leaf note, if I'm not mistaken. So Cycle, yeah, I think it's blackcurrant leaf. Now, Parfumo says blackcurrant, and there may be a little bit of blackcurrant, but there's really this focus on this green bitter is really the only way to describe it. There's a little bit of freshness here. There's some citrus fruits. But you're going to instantly pick up on this old school, you know, dry, bitter, woody, green feel is basically what the fragrance feels like. Maybe the blackcurrant adds a touch of fruitiness to an otherwise extremely sort of spicy and bitter feel to the fragrance, but I absolutely love this style. This is the type of stuff that's missing in perfumery today. If you're gonna buy one fragrance from the house of Otto Kern, and you have my taste, make it Cycle. Oh, fantastic stuff. And in fact, smelling it now, there's a little bit of Boss Spirit in here. So Boss Spirit is the one from 89 with the very medicinal green opening that dries down to a leather. So imagine that take on Boss Spirit, where, remember I said there was like Artemisia and Galbanum and just Basil and all of these green notes in the top of Boss Spirit. And then it almost felt like there was also this cannabis note, like every green note you could pile on top, right? And tarragon. It almost feels like that's how Cycle sort of opens up, but it doesn't dry down to the big leather base that Boss Spirit had. And that makes sense, actually, because Boss Spirit would have influenced this. This came out a couple years later. Interesting. It's very, very interesting, but definitely worth grabbing if you're into the kind of stuff that I am. And I like wearing that in the heat. Actually, Cycle for me is a fragrance that works best in the heat. But discontinued, you're gonna have to do some searching. But I don't think very many people are out there hyping up Otto Kern Cycle. I'll tell you that. All right, so that was number 7. Number 6 is a Krizia fragrance, and I actually dug out the EDP, which never gets a shout because it's a splash and it's a bitch to carry around. But for this video, we are going to spray the EDT, which actually has the atomizer. I got both of these for like 75 bucks, 100% steel. And I'll tell you what, Krazy Krizia is a Dominique Ropion fragrance. And it's funny because nowadays, people will pay big, big money for a Dominique Ropion creation, right? They'll pay over $1,000 for the night. But they won't pay 40 bucks for this. This is outstanding perfumery. This is absolutely outstanding, I'm telling you. If you haven't smelled some of these old Krizia fragrances that I rave about, if you haven't smelled Teatro alla Scala, if you haven't smelled Krazy Krizia, it's such an underrated house. Do yourself a favor. Take $40 and go buy a 100 ml bottle of Krazy Krizia. It is outstanding. You know what it's like? It's like you took the OG Obsession and you mixed it with Calvin Klein's KL for women, and you added this unbelievable peachy galbanum that reminds you of something from Cartier. Must de Cartier for women. This is a phenomenal. Must de Cartier is a phenomenal galbanum sort of peach fragrance. And you get that galbanum peach thing here. And so imagine you take 2 of the most iconic women's fragrances of the 80s and make them for the 90s. And Krizia loved making her fragrances sort of animalic and slightly challenging. So there's some civet in here. There's a big dose of patchouli in the base and tonka, but it's all about that tonka and vanilla and labdanum. And it is just one of the best spicy orientals that no one talks about. It is unbelievable to me, unfathomable to me. More people don't talk about Krazy Krizia. I get it's discontinued. I get Krizia is one of those houses that does not get the love, but damn, it should. And in fact, there's even a pure parfum version of this that has been on my wish list forever. There's an extrait. Oh, I would love to smell the extrait one day. But even the EDT or the EDP, don't worry about EDT or EDP. Either one. This EDT blows modern extrait, parfum intense, it just completely out of the water. Oh, it's so good. And, I mean, Dominique Ropion. It's just unbelievable. All right, so that's Krazy Krizia at number 6. Number 5 is Dior. And it's actually the fragrance that won the Fifi. This came out in 91, late 91, and then I think in 93 it ended up winning the Fragrance Foundation, or whatever they call it, Fifi Award. But this is Dune for women. And you talk about all-star perfumers here. This is Jean-Louis Suizac, one of my favorite perfumers of all time, and Dominique Ropion, and Nila Barbier, who I'm not as familiar with Nila's work. But the 2 big names here, Jean-Louis Suizac and Dominique Ropion. So Dune for women is another one that I will tell you is completely underrated. If you're a guy, oh, Don't overlook this. This aldehydic Brazilian rosewood opening with one of the best peony notes ever. So I know I always say that there's a couple fragrances that do peony unbelievable. One is Diamant. The other is Zonka. The third is this. This is now the florals might put some people off. There's jasmine, lily, rose, ylang ylang, and treacle mustard with sandalwood, musk, patchouli, ambergris, benzoin, oak moss, and vanilla. But God, I mean, you know how I just rave about the construction of fragrances like Bel Ami, and that is or even something like the original Opium, right? Or something like Fahrenheit, or Kenzo Jungle Elephant for women, or Pascal Moribito OR Black for men, right? You've heard me rave about stuff like those on the channel, right? They're all Jean-Louis Suizac, including this. So Fahrenheit, Dune, the original Opium, Bel Ami, OR Black, the Kenzo Jungle for women, the elephant. Just out of this world. Unbelievable. So don't overlook Dune is what I will tell you. And for some reason when I wear it, there's a little bit of this incense-like feel that I get. And I'm not sure where it's coming from. I mean, it's mostly sort of this, the florals definitely take over, but underneath you're going to get that oriental style. So, it's a little heavy, but the way that the aldehydic opening with the peony, which is a very delicate flower, and you really have to be very close to a peony to smell it. It smells extremely narcotic and beautiful, but you have to be right on it. If you're this far away, you won't smell it. I mean, your nose has to be buried in it, right? You have to basically be nose first into the peony. But then the dry down, the sandalwood, there's a sparkle to it. Even though there's some oriental, there's this, sparkle. It's slightly powdery, but I would have no problem wearing this, honestly, as a guy. It is fantastic. I love Dior's Dune. Just a beauty. Underrated. Not enough men talk about that fragrance. Okay. Next on the list, we have a Romeo Gigli fragrance. Yes, a Romeo Gigli fragrance beat out Dune. It's my list. Number 4, Romeo Gigli per Uomo. One of the best designers ever made. I love this stuff. I think it's, what's funny about Romeo Gigli is it's an Alberto Morillas. And if you smell this and you didn't know this was an Alberto Morillas, you probably wouldn't believe me. There's no way you would believe me. He was a completely different perfumer back in the day. Like if you smell his work from the 80s and early 90s, completely different perfumer. So Romeo, there's the green juice. All right, let's spray this bad boy. Let me show you guys this. So Romeo Gigli per Uomo has... So one of the reasons I love this so much is it has this ability of using this early 90s like cinnamony feel, which was done in things like, so the cinnamon itself has a slight Balenciaga Pour Homme feel to it. The fragrance goes in a completely different direction because you're going to get the plum. So you're going to get this plum that's almost directly out of something like Dior's Poison. I mean, it's a heavy plum, but it's mixed with old school masculine notes. So it's mixed with things like tarragon, lavender. There's a lemon tree note in here. So it's not really supposed to be lemon. It's supposed to smell like the air around a lemon tree is the way it was described to me. Brazilian rosewood, which is stunning. Aldehydes, grapefruit, bergamot, balsam fir, that cinnamon note, jasmine, carnation, ginger, honey. So there's a honey thick facet to it. So imagine this cinnamony honey with rose, patchouli, sandalwood, oak moss, tonka. vanilla, amber, benzoin, cedar, musk, and styrax. So the smell basically has a slight designer feel to it. All right. But what's so crazy about the fragrance is, for a designer feeling fragrance, it's so complex. Like, it does so many different things. It goes all over the place. I mean, it literally all over the place. There's that old school tarragon opening, which I love because it's because tarragon has this slight anise facet to it. You get the lavender, you get the Brazilian rosewood, you get the fruity plum, you get that aldehydic opening, the citruses, the cinnamon that reminds you slightly of Balenciaga Pour Homme's use of cinnamon. And patchouli. I think it's the cinnamon patchouli combination that gives me a little bit of this Balenciaga Pour Homme feel. And there's this resinousness, there's this resinous-like base with the styrax and the benzoin. And there's old school notes like oak moss still. So it's just completely underrated. One of my favorite designers. And it smells like a designer. That's what's so weird about it, but I love it. It's extremely unique. Okay, number 3 on the list is what many would consider probably one of the greatest sandalwood scents of all time, although there's a lot more going on. And if you go to Parfumo and you type in Guerlain Samsara, you're going to see 2 perfumers listed now, not just one. You're going to see Jean-Paul Guerlain and the great Gerard Anthony. Who, I mean, if this didn't give me a headache when I wore it, I would wear this much more. I have a hard time wearing it because of the fact that sometimes there's something in Samsara that gives me a headache. There's a beautiful ylang note, maybe one of the best ylang notes in perfumery, with peach and old school carnation and the whole floral heart. I mean, jasmine, narcissus, rose, violet. There's a powdery orris. This is a powdery fragrance. There's no doubt about that. It's a floral oriental fragrance. But man, that irisy sandalwood dry down, if it wasn't for the headache that this gives me, fantastic stuff. I absolutely adore Samsara. One of the greatest sandalwoods of all time. So that is Samsara at number 3. Number 2. Number 2 is maybe one of the most underrated fragrances on this list. And it's actually almost made number 1. There was a big debate here at Channel Ram as to whether it was going to be the one that actually made number 1 or this one. So just know this was very, very close to being my number 1. This is Versace versus Uomo. Extremely underrated Versace. It's actually my favorite Versace of all time. Of all the Versaces, this is my favorite. I like it more than the Dreamer. I like it more than Versace L'Homme. I like it more than Versace Man, which I really do love Versace Man. The only thing that I think can beat this is if I got a vintage bottle of Versace L'Homme, because I have a modern bottle, and it's okay. But I need a vintage. Well, I don't need a vintage, but I would like a vintage of Versace L'Homme. But Versace versus Uomo does this trick of late 80s, early 90s fragrances that I just love. I can't help but love. And you're going to see it with my number 1 pick as well. But it takes this fougere and it turns it into an amber fougere. Okay? So imagine things like Zeno or Free Life or Guerlain's Heritage, right? Imagine those things, but now imagine them done by an Italian house. And the Italians love their citruses. They are Italian fragrances in general put a heavy emphasis on citrus-heavy, openings. And this takes that amber fougere DNA and it adds mandarin orange, bergamot, lemon, orange, lime, petitgrain, which is sort of the sticks and twigs of the orange blossom tree. And beautiful rosewood. One of the best Brazilian rosewood fragrances no one talks about. Brazilian rosewood and rosewood was just a big note in the early 90s, as you can see. And then, of course, you had Egoist the year before this. And it just takes that, you know, classic old school amber type fougere. There's no lavender listed, but I swear I get a lavender note in here, but there technically is no lavender listed. It's a base of orris root, amber, vanilla, sandalwood, tonka bean, benzoin, cedar, and musk. It's just, I love this DNA. I just absolutely love it. Some people compare it to actually a Krizia fragrance I've never smelled, called Spazio Krizia Uomo. That's been on the wish list for a while, but I've never smelled that one. But I should, since I love the house so much. But Versace versus Uomo is, I think, one of the most underrated from the house. And then, number 1 is Ungaro. And it is Ungaro Pour l'Homme. Number 1 from 1991. Number 2 came out in 1992. Number 3 came out in 1993. But these were actually done by Francois Demachy and Jacques Polge of Chanel fame. They were the ones who got the contract. And I don't need to spray this. I need to cherish every spray of this because this is one of my favorite executions of that. I love Ungaro Pour l'Homme. It also does the lavender with bergamot, lemon, petit grain, and this green touch with geranium, carnation, jasmine, rose, and clary sage, musk, tonka bean, amber, and oak moss in the base. So it's a proper amber fougere. This does have the lavender listed. I still think there's lavender in Versus Uomo, but these two play in the same sandbox. But this goes much more heavier on the citruses, the Italian style. Imagine like an Italian style amber fougere, if you will. And this focuses more on this heavier, almost honeyed aspect, because there is a honey note listed on this tester bottle, and it's not listed in the note listing on Parfumo, but there is this honey-like feel. You know, there's this heft to this fragrance, spicy and slightly floral, but so well done. Man, the best Ungaro fragrance in my opinion. Unfortunate it's so hard to find, and you can see my bottle's been through some stuff. My bottle has had to go to counseling. It got thrown around a little bit, but it stayed strong. It stayed true to itself. And Ungaro Pour l'Homme is my number 1 fragrance from 1991. So I know we're at an hour. Thanks everyone for watching. Let me know what your favorites are from 1991. You know, I love seeing your faces in the comments. Thank you so much for the support. Cheers, guys, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.